Hello, dear viewers, my dear students and subscribers. It's been quite a long time since I have made a video, and this particular video is on the request of one of my subscribers, Anandi. She wanted a video on Cath Staincliffe's novel, The Kindest Thing. And I think the request came up about 2 months back, and I still haven't got around to doing it, and I'm sorry about the delay. But finally, I've made a video, and I hope I have done justice to her request and to the novel in the process. Anyway, so here goes. This is for you, Anandi P, and I hope it does justice to your request. Okay. So, Cath Staincliffe's The Kindest Thing. This particular novel was published in 2010, and the genre is romance and suspense, plus it's a legal drama. And the main characters are, of course, Deborah Shelley and her husband Neil Draper, and their two children, Adam and Sophie. So, Deborah Shelley is the 50-year-old protagonist of The Kindest Thing. She informs us in the first chapter that she will not be celebrating her birthday the next day because she's in prison under trial. And why is she under trial? She's under trial for murdering her beloved husband, Neil Draper. Theirs had been a good marriage. She had loved her husband deeply, and she missed him very badly. Their first meeting had not been impressive, and she had actually disliked him because he was something of a ladies' man and he had a number of girlfriends. But soon she had fallen in love with him, and they had had quite a good relationship. The novelist Cath Staincliffe narrates the story of Deborah Shelley and her family through Deborah's memories that capture the past, and she also describes events in the present. So there's a interspersing of the past and present throughout the novel, and through flashbacks we get to know about Deborah Shelley's past, about the important events in her life in the past, and simultaneously we are told about what is happening in her life in the present also. So, Deborah's memories. Deborah recollects the day on which Neil had died. She had been with him when he had stopped breathing, and she had not wanted to let go of him. She had gone to the bathroom and she had started vomiting. And she is persistently haunted by this question as to why she had helped her husband in dying. Fear haunted her. But then she had to do whatever was required of her. So she called the ambulance, and she informed her kids, Adam and Sophie. Her 15-year-old daughter, Sophie, the younger one, she comes home immediately and she starts making all the necessary arrangements. And immediately after that, the police and the ambulance also arrive. And Deborah is questioned by the police, and she informs them that Neil had had motor neuron disease and he had died at home. When she had gone to check him at 3 p.m., he had stopped breathing. So the policeman informs Deborah that the coroner would soon arrive for an inquiry because it had been a sudden death. She goes back to the bedroom and notices that the room has the smell of death. And soon Neil's parents, Michael and Veronica, they arrive. And Michael and Veronica are very different in their appearance from Neil. Neil had been much taller than them. And Deborah tells us about their origin. She tells us about the difference in their physical appearance. And then immediately we come back to the present, when Veronica starts crying when she sees Neil's body. The body was placed on the stretcher and it was shifted to the mortuary. And then again, we have another flashback where Deborah recollects their relationship, how the relationship began, how it progressed, and how they had arrived at a mutual understanding in the early stages of their relationship. They had known each other for 30 years and they had been married for nearly 24 years of them. And even after they had fallen in love with each other, Neil had continued to have relationships with other women. And Deborah, on seeing this, she also started having relationships with other people. She flirted with another man. And Neil happened to see this. And when he saw this, he immediately told her that we will live together. But Deborah always had these doubts whether he would be prepared to start living monogamously with her. He was somebody who was having multiple relationships together, and she had doubts whether he'll be able to sustain a monogamous relationship. It was an uneasy relationship in the beginning. Now, Deborah also tells us that, not Deborah, rather Cath Staincliffe, she tells us that Deborah's relationship with her mother had been quite difficult because her mother had spent her whole life cleaning, cooking, washing, shopping, and so on, and housework had taken over her life. And Deborah didn't want that to happen in her life. So she made it very clear from the beginning that he would have to share the burden of housework. She would not take up the role of the domestic goddess, spending all her time in cooking and cleaning and shopping and all that. And Neil was somebody who believed in equality. He definitely believed in equality, okay? He believed in equality, but he was not interested in practicing it. So she made it clear that she would not be at his beck and call, serving his needs. He would have to share his burden. He would have to share the household tasks. And there are tiffs in between them. They don't get along well in the beginning, but then Neil realizes that if he wants to have this relationship with Deborah, then he would have to listen to her. So he started sharing the household burden. He started doing the cooking and cleaning, and she actually became very good at DIY, do it yourself. And then again, Cath Staincliffe takes us back into the past, not brings us. She takes us back into the past with she tells us that Deborah had been in Stial prison for 9 months. And we find her waiting for the prison van with other prisoners waiting to be taken to the court. There are girls as young as her daughter Sophie and a quiet grey-haired Asian woman waiting with her for the van to be taken to the court. Deborah ardently hopes that she will be able to see her children, Sophie and Adam, in court. Sophie was with Neil's parents, Michael and Veronica, and Adam continued staying at their home. And Deborah wonders about his housekeeping skills and what condition the house would be in after Adam had taken over the management of the household. Jane, Deborah's best friend from college days, had invited Adam to her house, but he preferred to stay on at the family home. And finally, Deborah and the others arrive at court. Again, we have a flashback, and Deborah remembers the final days of her degree. She and Neil had traveled to Greece. Deborah had studied photography, and Neil had taken up history. Now, Deborah realized that she disliked photography. What she liked was to create the best background and setting for taking photos. Neil had finished his course earlier, and he had also completed a teacher training course. So, Neil had described the ancient Greek myths to Deborah on their journey, and they kept coming back to her mind when she finds herself accused of the murder of her husband. Again, continuing with the flashback, they started working in an agency, and then they vacationed in Greece for about 2 months. They did not have much money, but it had been a very good holiday, and they had had good food, clean accommodation, and they enjoyed a great deal of physical intimacy. And that sort of set the tone of their relationship. It became stronger. And then again, we come back to the present, and Deborah, come back to the present means the recent present, okay, not the immediate present. So there is the immediate present, there is the recent present, and there is the past. All these three time scales, or all these three things are, all these three periods are described by Cath Staincliffe. So we have all these three time periods running simultaneously throughout the novel. So Deborah thinks about her first meeting with her lawyer, Miss Gleason. Neil's body had not been released for funeral by the coroner's office even 2 weeks after his death. And those days were extremely disturbing. They were very restless days, and she had been in a very feverish state of mind. And there was no closure for her because the body had not been released, the funeral had not happened, and there were a lot of unanswered questions, and she was haunted by fears and doubts. Now, Cath Staincliffe tells us that Deborah had been an interior designer. She worked from her home office, and it was Neil's steady teaching job which provided them with a regular salary, holidays, and something to fall back on in difficult times in case Deborah had problems in her interior designing business and all that. One day, some time after Neil's death, the police had come to her house and they had taken her to the police station. She had left a note for the children and she had gone with them. And when she arrived at the police station, her photo had been taken, personal details, fingerprints, and DNA had been collected. She was made to sign a couple of papers and she had been taken to a cell and locked up. And she felt claustrophobic. She felt trapped. And she recollects how she used to calm down Adam when he hyperventilated and panicked. She used to stay with him and she used to calm him down until Neil came and took over. Now, Adam, he was the elder of the two children, and he had a number of problems. He was not mentally very stable, and plus he had a drug addiction issue, and all these things made him a very complicated teenager. So Deborah, inside her cell, she feels very lost. She feels trapped and she is very alone. And then realization dawns on her that she had been arrested and her children were not aware of it. And she realizes that she would have to spend the rest of her days in jail until the trial happened and the sentencing took place. So she is very worried about her children being alone at home in the night. And she yearns to sit down in her workshop and think about all these things that are happening. How her life has suddenly become so complicated. How once it was very calm and settled. Of course, there were issues, Neil's sickness, Neil's disease, these problems, Adam's problems, all these were there, but still she had adjusted and adapted herself to it. But suddenly everything had gone haywire. And so she yearns to sit down in her workshop and think about everything. But that cannot happen. Motor neuron disease had weakened Neil's body. His limbs had gradually lost their mobility and he had become weaker and weaker. He persuaded his wife Deborah to help him in committing suicide. And Deborah was shocked and she was deeply saddened by the declining health and mobility of Neil. Then again, we have this sequence where she thinks about Adam and Sophie. Adam had been a rebellious and distracted child. He had had a number of problems: mental instability, drug problems, and he used to continuously absent himself from school. Meanwhile, Sophie was wiser than her years. And she often felt left out because Adam's problems tended to take over everything, and all the focus was on Adam. And she felt very lost and left out. Even in school and at home, Adam's problems tended to take over her life. And she was somebody who was very calm, somebody who was very poised, and somebody who knew how to handle herself. But there were times when she broke down under the pressure of all these things that were happening. Now, when Neil's motor neuron disease became severe, Deborah became the prime carer, and Neil intensely hated his complete dependence on Deborah. His muscles became progressively weaker, and Deborah did a lot of research on the net, and she found that MND is incurable. The disease would not affect his brain, but his physical faculties would be impaired beyond repair. They did not inform the children about Neil's disease. Now, Neil's physical decline was progressive and damaging. One Friday night, when 16-year-old Adam did not return home even late at night, Neil and Deborah were very worried. He had just started going back to school after counseling. And early next morning, they received a call from the Manchester Royal Infirmary that Adam had been admitted there. And that was something very shocking for them. They got the call early in the morning around 5 o'clock. And Adam had consumed a very volatile cocktail of drugs and vodka. His system had been cleaned up, but he was very, very apprehensive about his ability to stay away from drugs. And it is at this point of time that we have Sophie breaking down and crying, and Deborah talks to her, and Deborah tries to calm her down. But Sophie was actually much more closer to her father than to her mother. Sophie considered Neil to be her pillar of support, and they were very close to each other. Now, MND reduced Neil to complete helplessness. He became extremely dependent. He lost complete mobility and control over his physical faculties, and he did not want to continue living. So he asked Deborah's help to kill himself. And Deborah resisted this pressure, but finally she agreed to help him. After his death, Deborah is held on suspicion of murdering him, and she is put on trial. Her daughter and her mother-in-law accuse her for Neil's death, and the family is torn apart. Sophie blames her mother, and when they speak to each other, she says that she should not have done it. Now again, we go back to Deborah's reminiscences, and Deborah thinks about the day when she was brought to the police station and subjected to a very tough police interrogation about her marriage, about her children, about the day on which Neil had died. And her lawyer tells her that she is supposed to say no comments, okay, to all the queries that are addressed to her. Neil's body is subjected to a second postmortem, and the report stating that unusually high levels of morphine and alcohol had been found in his body. That report is handed over to Deborah's lawyer. And when Deborah listens to this, when Deborah is informed about the report, and she's also told by the detective associated with the case, Mr. Bray, that there are signs of damage to the blood vessels tension and fear grip her, and she imagines the Greek Furies coming to punish her. Finally, the police charge her with the murder of her husband. She is sent to prison, and when she arrives in prison, she is asked to undress and she is given the prison uniform, not the police uniform. Her mobile is taken away and she is allowed to make a phone call to her children. Adam answers her and he is very unsettled that Deborah is in prison and will not be coming back home. Sophie is having a bath, so Deborah is unable to speak to her. And she spends her first night in prison in the first night center. She does not get bail and her trial comes up after around 7 to 8 months. The trial begins and Deborah expects to see her children in court. Her lawyers are Miss Gleason and Mr. Latimer. Deborah had initially told the lawyers that she had found her husband dead. She had not revealed to them that she had helped her husband die. She finds her best friend Jane and her son Adam in court. Neither Sophie nor her in-laws are present in court. Later on, as the days go on and the trial continues, Deborah is informed that her 16-year-old daughter, Sophie, would appear as a witness for the prosecution. So this shocks her. Her daughter being subjected to public scrutiny is something that rattles Deborah. Deeply disturbed that Sophie would become a victim of intense media scrutiny and debate, Deborah thinks of pleading guilty to the murder of her husband. She discusses the consequences of doing so with Miss Gleason, and she is informed that she will get a life sentence. Gleason informs her that they can inform the court that the stress of caring for her physically debilitated husband and her immature and troubled son had created a very difficult situation for Deborah. The lawyer tells her that they could tell the court that she had been in a fragile and emotionally disturbed state of mind, and this had made her give in to her husband's persuasion and aid him in his suicide. So the lawyer, Miss Gleason, she asks Deborah to reveal the complete truth. Otherwise, it would become impossible to defend Deborah in court. Her credibility would be damaged and she would be verbally abused in public. So Deborah confesses the truth to the lawyer and says that she had hoped that she would escape prosecution. When Neil and Deborah had planned this mercy killing or suicide, they had assumed that things would be very smooth and Deborah would not be asked to face a trial. But their plans had gone awry and everything had fallen apart. The trial drags on and Deborah gets the name of Miss Mercy Killer in prison. She gradually adapts herself to life in prison. The prosecution attempts to depict Deborah as a cold-blooded murderer, a cold-blooded killer. So Dolores Cabril, the psychiatric expert for the prosecution, had been a real threat for Deborah. Deborah points out that the trial is not about Neil's right to die. It is not about my right to help him. It is solely about one question: was I responsible for my actions? Society expected her to repent her actions. Finally, after dragging on for quite a long period of time, the trial comes to an end. And the judge informs the 12-member jury that their duty is to judge whether Deborah Shelley was mentally unstable when she had helped her terminally or seriously ill husband die, or that she had had a sound mind and had purposely aided her husband in his death. The judge says to the jury, if you find the evidence shows that she was of sound mind, then the verdict must be guilty of murder. If, however, you believe the balance of her mind was disturbed to such an extent that it diminished her responsibility, then you must find the defendant, Deborah Shelley, not guilty of murder, but guilty of manslaughter due to diminished responsibility. So the jury goes into a huddle, and they pronounce the verdict. The verdict pronounced by the 12-member jury is that Deborah Shelley is not guilty, and Deborah returns to Stial prison. The sentencing will happen only after 2 weeks. Now the jury has pronounced its verdict. The judge will pronounce the sentence only after 2 weeks. And when she arrives in the prison, she finds her prison pals, friends in prison, speculating about the years of punishment that will be doled out to her. And finally, they sort of come to a conclusion that maybe she'll be in prison for just 5 years because she has got a sentence for around diminished responsibility for manslaughter. So they speculate that she'll probably be sentenced for just 5 years of prison. And everybody leaves the hall, and Deborah is there, and there is another prisoner called Patsy. And Patsy asks her if the jury had actually believed that she had been mentally unstable when she had helped her husband die. When she hears this query, Deborah becomes very cautious. Fear stalks her, it haunts her, and she immediately thinks, if I reveal the facts, then Patsy can go and tell somebody and I can get back into trouble. But then she looks into Patsy's eyes, and that sort of reassures her. She feels that she can trust Patsy. And she tells her the truth, that she was mentally stable when she had helped her husband commit suicide. She had helped her husband in mercy killing. And Patsy calmly says to Deborah, you were just being kind, really. Anyone would do the same if they really love someone. It shouldn't be counted like murder. Deborah returns to her cell. She yearns to return to her normal life. She wants to be reunited with her children. Sophie has drifted away from the family. Sophie hates Deborah. And Deborah keeps thinking about how she will bring back Sophie into the family fold. And she has moved away physically and mentally. She is now living with Michael and Veronica. And then Deborah thinks about her relationship with her husband. And she comes to the conclusion that the names of Deborah Shelley and Neil Draper are intrinsically connected forever in the public psyche. The novel ends with Deborah deciding that she will not endure any more pain, misery, and suffering. She will not endure any more blame and infamy for Neil. She has had enough for a lifetime. So, this is a brief summary of Cath Staincliffe's novel, The Kindest Thing. And I hope I have done justice to the novel, and I hope I have covered all the important aspects of the novel. So with this, I will conclude, and thank you Anandi for sort of giving me the inspiration to start working on my videos again. Thank you so much. So bye, and see you in the next session of Offbeat Gyan.